Ja. Oké. Hallo, 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 hallo. Is er geluid? Er is geen geluid. Er is geen geluid. Goedenavond. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the auditorium of TU Delft. On this evening we have a very interesting but also controversial topic. But it is a topic that is addressed tonight by an architect, a member of the American Institute of Architects. And he's not alone, because Richard Gage is a spokesperson for more than 2,300 architects and engineers, international experts in different fields from all over the world, who have questions. And tonight, well, we are a University of Technology, technical questions about what happened on that fateful morning in September 2001. The controversy is, of course, due to the fact that the consequences of 9/11 were that huge for the world and that emotional for the people involved, that many people react also very emotional. Still, having that said, this is going to be an evening where we are looking at the technical implications, things that students from the TU Delft should be able to understand and criticize as they please. And I see that there are many of you here present. And it will be a long night because Richard has much to tell, and he told me that it won't be boring, so that's nice. And so we'll take 2 hours for his presentation, and after that we have about 30 to 45 minutes for Q&A, as it is called. So without much ado, I would like to welcome architect Richard Gage.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. Thank you very much. This is a very warm welcome for us. 2,300 architects and engineers that I represent are here at Delft Technical University to give you some really important information. It's our 4th stop on our 10-country tour throughout Europe, and I have to tell you that I'm in love with Delft. I walked through your town. We don't have anything like this in America. Call me naive, but it's just charming and quaint. And don't you just love it here? You're so lucky. I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional with my friends from Amsterdam and Delft too. You know, it is my deep honor to address you today. 9/11 truth. The world is ready. It's time to talk about it. And I want to start off by thanking you for your willingness to come and examine the facts, because you know what? There are thousands of people who will not. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons for that in a few minutes. But this is an extremely difficult job. Your willingness to reconsider the very, very traumatic events of 9/11, tragic loss of life. You know, also, just as architecture and engineering projects have proven to be, to me, sometimes extremely joyful, sometimes just downright difficult, this particular project, the truth about 9/11, the evidence about 9/11, has proven to be one of the most difficult. Not difficult in terms of reaching conclusions, though, but difficult in terms of the implications of those conclusions, and finding people open-minded and willing enough, like yourselves, to come and to look at the evidence. So my commitment to you tonight is to speak the truth and to leave you with extremely valuable information that will help you separate error from fact, truth from lies, myth from reality. But please, check out all of the facts that you hear tonight. We're not looking for believers. This is not some kind of religion or conspiracy theory cult. After all, doubts about the official investigation, the 9/11 Commission, didn't begin with the 9/11 Truth Movement, composed of millions of people around the globe. It started with the 9/11 commissioners themselves. Timothy Romer saying, "We were extremely frustrated with the false statements we were getting." Max Cleland resigning from the commission, citing it's a national scandal. America's being cheated. The White House wants to cover it up. What are they talking about? Their own attorney in his book, The Ground Truth, John Farmer. "I was shocked at how different the truth was from the way it was described. There was an agreement not to tell the truth." Why would he say that? What government and military officials told the Congress, the Commission, the media, and the public about who knew what and when was almost entirely and inexplicably untrue, he says. So, that alone is reason for a reinvestigation of 9/11, let alone what you're about to hear and see tonight. So it's extremely important that we find out exactly what happened, what's true about this. After all, it served as the pretext for the invasion of two countries in which already over 2 million people have perished, including dozens of Dutch soldiers, 6,000 U.S. soldiers. It also served for as the dawn of a $4.5 trillion global war on terror and the loss of our civil liberties in the U.S. with the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, in which any of us in America can be arrested, held indefinitely, not told what we're charged with, not have a right to a lawyer, no right to a trial. We can be tortured and we can be assassinated. Is that what our forefathers fought for 200 years ago? No. A host of other ills that we're suffering from as a nation and all around the world. All of this remains intact if we fail to face the truth about 9/11 and sweep it under the rug of history. And only the truth about 9/11 will stop another 9/11 type attack from happening again. So these are among the many reasons that we have to peer back into this painful part of our recent world history and re-examine the relatively new physical evidence that we've not seen in the mainstream media. Speaking of which, Time magazine reports that 36% of Americans doubt the official story. They say that it's not a fringe phenomena, the 9/11 truth movement. It's a mainstream political reality. Well, another poll in 2007 finds that about 16% of Americans believe the Twin Towers were blown up with explosives, not jet plane impacts. Well, what we're going to do is find out where we are in the room. And I'll ask you 3 questions. And everybody falls into one of these categories, so you have to vote. That's the rules. You either believe the official story, as I did early on, and most people do, or you're unsure, or you may have come to the room tonight already aware of some of the evidence and agreeing with that. First of all, the official story. Jet planes hit the towers, large explosion of jet fuel, weakening of the structural system by fire, gravitational collapse all the way down to the ground. No reason to believe otherwise. This is what we have been taught in school and by our media and so forth. How many of us pretty much there in the room? Can we raise the lights too? Because I'm actually going to count these hands. Raise up the lights for me. Raise up the lights. Okay, go like this, and I'll actually watch this. I can do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 50, 61, 62, 63, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72. 72. How many of you are unsure? You've heard a few things. You're here to check it. Wow. A whole bunch of the rest of you. Now let me try it the other way. How many of you have already come to tonight's presentation agreeing with the evidence for controlled demolition. As you already know, I'm going to be, and half of the rest of you. So this is a great mix, isn't it? This is fantastic. So now you know what you're up against here tonight. Well, guess what? I'll need more volume, Paul. Paul, I will need more volume. I appreciate that so much. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, found that they claimed that they found no evidence for explosive demolition. Later, they acknowledged that they never looked for it. I mean, in writing. How can you find what you're not looking for? Well, thousands of others have found it. Architects, scientists, many, many others. We've been speaking about it in 35 foreign countries, 82 American cities, to groups from 100 to 1,000 now. And it's not hard to find. It's been found. It's been documented. By the way, how many architects are here tonight? Oh, my God. Go like this so I can actually see your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 20. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 23, 24. 24. You believe this, don't you? You believe me, Mom, don't you? Okay. Inside joke. How many engineers? Oh! I'm not going to count you. I'm guessing there's like 200 engineers. How many normal people are here tonight? Yes. Okay, good. Paul, I'll need more volume on me. Okay, well, I'm not that normal, as you can imagine, but I did do normal things as an architect. I designed these $3 and $10 million gymnasiums, and also the $120 million high school, which I performed the construction administration for in California. And then in Las Vegas, I worked on these mid-rise office buildings and 6 blocks of retail, altogether a $400 million project with 1,200 tons of fireproof steel framing. So I've never worked on high-rises, but I've got a lot of experience behind me anyway. And we're going to go very fast through this information tonight. So I want you to know we have a website, and you have a brochure. At least you had the opportunity to get one. We have one for you, and it has highlights of the evidence and our website on it. How many of you did not get a brochure? Okay, see all these hands? That's most everybody. Do we have the brochures? Downstairs? Okay, can you take 5 people, go downstairs and get them? I want everybody to have a brochure in your hand because it has the outline of today's presentation. We'll be back, and let me know when you come back, Vico, so that we can make sure we get everybody a brochure. So our website is AE. Thank you. That's for you, Vico. Big hand of applause for our volunteers. Website ae911truth.org. Now, let's find out what happened on that day so we can all kind of get on the same page before we start looking at the evidence. Here we go.
On September 11th, we learned that 4 passenger planes were hijacked and taken radically off course. Within an hour, 2 of the planes had flown into the enormous steel towers of the World Trade Center, creating fires and eventually toppling them. Dazed by the news, the American public soon believed the fires in the towers had burned so hot they caused the steel frames of the buildings to give way. A myth developed, fed by official sources through the media to a bewildered audience. Elements of the myth. The impact of the airplanes, gallons of burning jet fuel, steel melting, the buildings failing and suddenly imploding. In a mere 10 seconds, 110 stories hurtled earthward, pulverizing into dust.
We ran to the window of the building.
right from the start, on the street itself, the official story was born.
Come out of nowhere and just ream right into the side of the Twin Tower, exploding through the other side. And then I witnessed both towers collapse, one first and then the second, mostly due to structural failure because the fire was just too intense.
The myth bled into the FEMA report and was echoed by the experts.
It was the combination of the impact load doing great damage to the building, followed by the fire, that caused collapse.
Well, here's pretty much the official story in a nutshell, right? Where did it come from? Oh, from that guy, mostly due to structural failure because the fire was just too intense. This is the first person interviewed right off the street who has the answer to the question that fire protection engineers, structural engineers have been debating for years now. Anyway, let's set that aside and look at the scientific method. We've had it in the West for 100 years or so. It's pretty helpful. We ask a question. How did the towers come down? We do some background research. How have other towers come down? Construct a hypothesis, make some predictions, and then test those predictions with experiments and analyze the results. Maybe our best guess is fire brought these towers down. Maybe it's controlled demolition. We put all the hypotheses out on the table. We analyze them objectively. We don't zoom in and have some sort of agenda on one or the other. This is science. It's objective. If the hypothesis is corroborated by the experiments, the data, the research, we report those results in an open, transparent manner for all to build on the body of our work. That's the beauty of the modern scientific method. Sometimes the hypothesis is not corroborated. What do? We go back and construct another one that has a better chance against the data. We'll be testing the hypotheses, the scientific method and use thereof by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked with the responsibility of explaining these collapses to the American people and indeed the people around the world. So hold up your hand high if you need a brochure. We've got our helpers, at least one, over here. And if there's any others, I'd start down in the front. So we're going to apply the scientific method here today. This is a great place to do it at the university. What are the forces that destroy buildings? Well, certainly, fires have destroyed buildings before. A fire is an organic process. It moves through a building every 20 minutes or so, burning out one area, leaving behind a burnt-out area, but looking for fresh new fuel sources. So there's enough fire in a given area for 20 minutes, and when a building collapses due to fire, it'll fall in stages, kind of organically, asymmetrically, not straight down through the path of greatest resistance, the unburned area, for instance. Well, let's take a look and see what steel-framed buildings do in fires.
The way in which steel-framed buildings behave in fires depends on their construction. In this test, done by British Steel in 1995, a large amount of typical office furniture was burned to see what would happen to the heavy steel beams that supported the ceiling.
When steel is bare, when it heats up, it gets weaker. It's not that it melts in a fire. In fact, normal fires are not hot enough to melt steel. Even if you were, for example, to use an unusual fuel like kerosene.
This is your normal office furniture, by the way, in this test on fire.
You cannot achieve temperatures hot enough to melt steel. But what happens is it starts to lose its strength. And as it loses its strength, it starts to sag. It becomes softer and sags and can no longer support the load.
This was the largest test of its kind ever conducted. It showed how unprotected steel can be distorted even by a normal office fire. But as is typical in steel buildings, the structural beams only slowly and progressively warped and sagged. There was no chance of a sudden collapse.
In over 20 years, I have not seen, until recently, a protected steel structure that has collapsed in a fire.
Until recently. What we're referring here to is 9/11, 01, when we had not 2, but 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers collapsing. So this is extremely important information. One of the most conservative tests that can be done with steel, not even fireproofed, under 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, about 1,000 degrees Celsius. Well, how have other high-rises fared in fires? In Los Angeles, we have 3.5 hours burning over 5 floors. In Philadelphia, 18 hours over 8 floors. And in Caracas, Venezuela, 17 hours over 26 floors. None of these have come down due to fire. No high-rise has ever come down due to fire. And steel frame high-rises in particular. These are buildings that have come down. How? Earthquakes. They fall naturally. There's asymmetrical massive building at the bottom. It's recognizable as a building. The concrete is not pulverized. The structural elements are not severed one from another. This is very important too. So now we have a set of buildings that have fallen naturally, that look like buildings that have fallen as opposed to what you're about to see. Now, some buildings are blown up. We have thick, billowing, enormous clouds, pyroclastic-like clouds, with unfolding cauliflower shapes produced by the incredibly hot gases released in the chemical reactions from the explosives. We have witnesses that hear explosions. They see flashes of light. We have a geometry of fireworks, a symmetrical distribution. That's what explosions do. These are key features of explosions. Of course, those explosions can be harnessed quite efficiently, put in as cutter charges in the connections to the columns and beams. And they can be severed such that they're brought down in a nice, neat pile, broken up, ready for loading and shipment, falling almost at free fall acceleration. And there's only a handful of companies that can even accomplish this level of precision in the world. One of them, by the way, was right here in the Netherlands. We're going to meet him. Now, let's take a look at some of the key characteristics of controlled demolition. We have a sudden onset of destruction, usually at the base of the structure. We have a straight down symmetrical collapse into its own footprint usually, or however they want to engineer that, because demolition waves remove those column supports. We have a free fall acceleration often, or almost, through the path of what was the greatest resistance, the thousands of tons of structural steel in the building, resulting in the total dismemberment of the steel structure, so it's broken up, ready for loading and shipment. Minimal damage to adjacent structures, and sounds and of explosions that witnesses hear. Flashes of light that witnesses hear. Enormous clouds of pyroclastic-like smoke with pulverized concrete. And explosive charges going off here or there. Maybe it's the wrong time or not, but they're obviously explosions. And of course, chemical evidence left behind of cutter charges, which are explosives or incendiaries. Direct evidence of explosive destruction is what all 10 of these key characteristic features are. And guess what? Fire can't account for any one of them, let alone all 10 of them. Now, if you have additional corroborative evidence, like government documentation, hey, that can be helpful. That was a controlled demolition. Experts agree that's a controlled demolition. At least those experts that don't have a stake in $100,000 contracts with the federal government that might bias their opinion about whether something, like the World Trade Center, for instance, was an explosive demolition. Foreknowledge. We know these are coming down in advance because it takes months to plan and execute such an operation. Video documentation can be very helpful. Yeah, it looks like a controlled demolition. This is all proof of controlled demolition. Now, interesting thing is, we're going to apply that set of criteria to the third worst structural failure in modern history that I'm guessing, like me, most of you know nothing about, or at least those of you who already haven't researched it. It's a very interesting building, Building 7. If we could raise the lights, how many of you are relatively unfamiliar with this Building 7? What is this Building 7? Relatively unfamiliar. Raise your hands. I'm going to say half of you. In fact, let's reverse it. How many of you are familiar? Oh my God, more of you. Okay, 2/3 familiar to 1/3. Now, I'm going to tell you about this building for a very important reason. It came down on the afternoon of 9/11. This is a 47-story skyscraper. It wasn't hit by an airplane like the two Twin Towers. I know it looks small relative to them, but they were the highest buildings in the world in the early 70s when they were built. This would be the highest building in most of our states. This tall building is 22 stories out here, right next to this University Hall, the AV building. And, did I say that right? You Dutch-speaking people, did I say that right, AV? Yeah, I do. Okay, good. Thanks. So, now what happens? It's a football field away from the Twin Towers, and on the afternoon of 9/11, it's still standing after the Twin Towers have come down and made a mess of everything. A few beams actually ended up striking this building, but NIST says that this is not a significant factor in the destruction of this building. Yes, it was destroyed. We're going to take a look at that destruction and compare its features to the features of a controlled demolition. See if there are any similarities. Beginning with, is there a sudden onset of destruction at the base of the structure? Let's listen to Dan Rather as he describes his experience of this. He's a CBS anchor that doesn't really work in the U.S. anymore.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
What was that? So here Dan is using his intuition to describe what he's seeing, because, hey, we've all seen the controlled demolitions like from Las Vegas and around the world, and they kind of look like that. Well, let's keep going here. Do we have a straight-down symmetrical collapse? The problem, by the way, with Dan is he never repeated those words ever again as an anchor in CBS. In fact, we've never seen Building 7 come down, with maybe 3 exceptions, maybe 4, on mainstream television. Why wouldn't this be the most well-known, well-studied collapse in history? Nobody died, but somebody could have. A few small fires, as you'll see, being held as the reason for its collapse. From West Street, is it straight down? Symmetrical. Pretty much so. Look at the penthouse. It falls half a second earlier, indicating complete core column damage right under that penthouse a half a second earlier. Synchronized. Very interesting. But I'm not quite convinced yet. Let's look at controlled demolition on the right, Building 7 on the left. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? Especially since it looks exactly like one. Especially since fire has never brought down a high-rise building completely. No. NIST did not even seriously look at the possibility. They went straight for fire. And these are the worst fires that we have photographic or video evidence of. And those fires are burning on the 12th floor and the 13th floor. And that's where NIST says the initiation of collapse happened. Right in this northeast corner where column 79 was. Now the problem was those fires are said to have expanded these beams on that floor. But the photographic and video evidence shows that the fires were out over an hour before the collapse. So they could not possibly have been expanding these beams, which are 5 or 6 meters long, on pushing this column off of its seat, this girder, off of its seat on this column. And that's the official story. And that this floor then fell on this one, and so on for 9 floors, leaving this column then unbraced, so it buckles, and then the entire inside of the building caves in. Now, none of that could have happened for a whole variety of reasons. First of all, these beams are fireproofed. They can't ever get that hot. There's only 20 minutes of fuel in a given area. It can't heat up the beam. What does NIST do to prove their theory? In an isolated computer experiment, they heat up that beam in 2 seconds so that it's very hot, so it's forced to expand out. It doesn't sag. It can't sag. A beam would sag under, like you saw in the test results. Well, it couldn't have expanded anyway because it's tied with shear studs or pins that tie the top of the beam into the slab above, making it a composite structural system. And so NIST says, well, those shear studs broke. Well, they prove that by not heating up the concrete at all, forcing them in their computer model to break. Well, even if that could have happened, these beams could not have caused this girder to slide off of its seat, because that girder also had shear studs tying it into the slab up above, which NIST denied, but the shop drawings show that they were there. Well, even if they weren't there, and this girder could have slid sideways, it would have had to have slid all the way off that seat. That's moving 12 inches laterally, not 5 or 6 like NIST says. Now, NIST says they got away with that because they say this flange folded after it only got halfway off of its seat. And so that's a lie, because there are structural stiffeners at the end of this girder on the shop drawings, which NIST also omitted in their computer model. So we're looking at a series of frauds here, but I'm only beginning. If this girder had fallen off of its seat on this column, these other 3 girders would have remained and held up that floor. It couldn't even have fallen. But even if they weren't there, that floor might have fallen and touched this floor, but not caused a 9-floor progressive collapse, as NIST claims. But even if that would have happened, we would have seen in a 9-floor collapse massive perimeter structural deformation and breaking of the exterior granite panels and windows, none of which you saw in those videos. So NIST says, well, here's their computer model. What's happening here is then this failure travels vertically, and they've got in their computer model 400 structural steel connections failing every second in order to try to show what happened to this building. But you can see it looks nothing like the reality, which is timed coincident next to it. They can't even get it to look like what actually happened in their forgery of a computer model. And it begins to tip over even, so they don't even show us what happens after 2 seconds. It's fraud from beginning to end. There would have been massive warpage, which their computer model does show, but in reality, the videos betray. Well, how do we get a building to come straight down into its own footprint? Guess what? We have to remove all 80 columns virtually at once and on at least 8 floors, because that's the distance over which this building fell at free fall. Can fire have that level of precision? Once you answer that question, you're in trouble, serious trouble. Because it results in a free fall acceleration.
We can measure the downward acceleration of Building 7 by video frame analysis. I used a magnifying glass to place markers on the corner of the building on each frame. From this we can get a data table and various graphs. The slope of this graph indicates acceleration, which is shown here to be about minus 10.279 plus or minus 0.6. Free fall in a vacuum is minus 9.8 in these units. That falls within the margin of error of this measurement. In other words, the rate of fall of Building 7 in the first few seconds is indistinguishable from free fall in a vacuum.
Well, this member of AE 911 Truth confronts NIST publicly in their press conference at the release of the final report and the draft report. And NIST says, oh, you're right. It did fall at free fall, because they were denying that in the draft report. But they don't acknowledge the implication of that free fall, which it's gaining greater distance every second, the definition of free fall. Now, let's just look at this for a second. Free fall, I'm going to drop this object. 3, 2, 1. That's free fall. Now, as fast as a bowling ball falling off this building. How can it fall at free fall? Because there's no resistance underneath. No resistance. This building had 40,000 tons of structural steel underneath it. 5 times stronger than it needed to be to hold the building up for the life of it. So the question again is, where did that resistance go? It's as if 8 stories were removed from the building all of a sudden, just gone instantly. Instantly. You know, not like a natural process, resulting in the total dismemberment of the steel structure. We had a moment-resisting steel frame building with columns and beams rigidly welded together. We should have seen, if in any kind of a natural collapse, maybe 20 stories of building, maybe it would have tipped over, something like you see here in a natural collapse. But no, what we see is like a house of cards, completely shattered, one structural steel element from another. Do we have witnesses that hear explosions?
And the whole time you're hearing boom, 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 boom. So, I think I know an explosion when I hear it.
And then it was like another 2-3 seconds, you heard explosions. Like, boom! It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was a boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor, I heard some more explosions.
What's the sound?
Like a boom. Like an explosion.
And more than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs, we made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
Lots of witnesses hearing explosions. How many of them made it into the final report of NIST? 0. Not one. Even explosions that you can hear, too.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
On the afternoon of 9/11, is there chemical evidence of explosives or incendiaries? We'll come back to this when we touch base with the Twin Towers. For now, we have all 8 key characteristics of explosive destruction, and fire can't create any one of these. Well, like this fire in World Trade Center 5, fully engulfed in flames. Did it come down? No. Mid-rise, high-rise buildings, this one I think is 9 stories, don't come down due to fire. Not steel frame, fireproofed buildings for sure. Nor this in Beijing, 44 stories, fully engulfed, top to bottom. Did it come down? Nope. Here's before, here's after, slightly toasted around the edges, put back into use. But these small fires brought this massive building, each floor of which is the size of a football field, down in just 6.5 seconds. Completely destroyed one column from another. Let's take a look at the report that came out early on, May of 2002. FEMA, they say the specifics of the fires in World Trade Center 7 and how they caused the building to collapse remain unknown at this time. Unknown. Our best hypothesis, fire plus random damage and then complete collapse, has only a low probability of occurrence. Wait a minute. What do you do when your best hypothesis has a low probability of occurrence? You go back and find another one that has a better probability. In fact, that's what they say. Further research, investigation, and analysis are needed to resolve this issue. Unfortunately, though, for those hoping to resolve the issue, the evidence, the steel, was sent away starting 2 weeks after 9/11 to China for recycling, prompting Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, to cite crucial evidence that could answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately. Did it? No. What do the experts say? Well, right here in the Netherlands, 27-year controlled demolitions expert Danny Jowenko. It starts from below. They've simply blown away the columns. It's a controlled demolition. Now, he says this without being told that the laptop he's watching this this collapse on, it was on 9/11. So he's saying this candidly. A team of experts did this. Professional work without a doubt. Then they say, well, did you know this happened on 9/11? No. Really? Yeah, really. It did. Well, they must have worked very fast then. He knows it takes months. You don't just plan an operation like this in an afternoon. Do we have foreknowledge of the destruction? Watch these mysterious construction workers walking away from Building 7, hearing an explosion, looking back over their shoulder, and then looking straight into the CNN camera and saying this.
Keep your eye on that building as they coming down. Building is about to blow up. Move it back. All right, guys.
We are looking back. There's a building about to blow up. Flame, debris coming down.
The building is about to blow up. Flame and debris coming down. How do they know this? What is going on here? Do fires blow up buildings? Well, here's Kevin McPadden. You heard him talking about explosions before. Right before that, he's hearing this. They were all held back about 6 blocks away, listening, expecting it to come down. I mean, they were told it had structural damage. And he's listening to this radio held in the hands of a Red Cross worker, and he hears...
At the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1.
Do fires bring buildings down to countdowns? What's going on here? Well, Jane Stanley of the BBC is on the job. She reports the collapse of this building 20 minutes before it even happened. That's good reporting. They apologize for this error, citing the confusing events of the day. Does this make them psychic? What is going on again? Better than that, good old America, CNN announced it that morning.
In New York, Alan Dodd-Frank joins us on the phone in Lower Manhattan. Alan?
Alan, just 2 or 3 minutes ago, there was yet another collapse or explosion. I'm now out of sight. A Good Samaritan has taken me in on Duane Street. But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who rushed by us estimated that 50 stories went down. The street filled with smoke. It was like a forest fire roaring down a canyon. Now, as I think Patty Sabga and others have told you, all of Manhattan is covered, downtown Manhattan is...
50 stories went down? There was no other 50-story building that went down on 9/11. There was no other building that went down on 9/11. There were some damaged buildings, crushed some parts of buildings by the massive steel that fell when the Twin Towers went down. Had this building gone down at that time, 10:45 that morning, it would have been completely obscured by the massive dust cloud released when the Twin Towers collapsed. So we wouldn't even have video of it. So some people suggest, well, it was a dud. It was supposed to go down at that time, and that's what these construction workers were doing, for some reason, going back into the building to fix it. Well, that's speculation, but the question for us right now, relative to Building 7, is the hypothesis corroborated of explosive demolition, or is the hypothesis of fire corroborated? Do we have a sudden onset of destruction and all the other key characteristics of explosive destruction? So far, looking at the evidence for cutter charges a little bit later, is this direct evidence of explosive destruction to you? Because I'm going to ask you, can fire create any one of these features? And is there additional corroborative evidence that gives you proof of controlled demolition? So if we can have the lights up, I'll ask you those three questions yet once again. How many of us agree with the official story that this building came down by normal office fires? Go like this so I can actually count you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Move your hand so I can see you. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Anybody over here? Go like this. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And anybody here? Anybody on the floor? What's the matter with you guys? You might be unsure. How many of you might still be unsure? There were a few before. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, okay, I'll give up. There's a few of you who are unsure. How many of you think these buildings came down by controlled demolition? Okay, the greater majority. It's not majority rules here. It's science that rules. And each of us has our own interpretation of the scientific principles. And so for those of you who, which is the majority, in this room, you've got the biggest problem, don't you? Because what are we talking about here? We're talking about one third of the destruction of the World Trade Center on 9/11. This is part of the problem of 9/11. And whether you look at it, who's in this building? Let's just take a look at this. The CIA, the IRS, the Secret Service, the Department of Defense, Mayor Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management, the Securities and Exchange Commission. The Securities and Exchange Commission, by the way, lost thousands of very valuable, irreplaceable files it was using to pursue Wall Street companies like Enron and WorldCom. So we certainly want an investigation of those fires on the 12th and 13th floor occupied by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Is it reasonable to assume that Al-Qaeda would have had access to this building to set these explosives? Probably not. This is the reason that you hear people saying this is some sort of an inside operation, which is the big problem of 9/11 for those who believe that the evidence leads them to conclude that this is a controlled demolition, right? Well, this is the reason we are educating the public in massive campaigns across the country. And on 9/11, particularly in New York, with massive digital billboards. Did you know a third tower fell on 9/11? Theoretically, no one died when Building 7 came down. It was evacuated after the planes hit the towers. And so we don't have the baggage, the emotional trauma that most of us, particularly in the United States and particularly in New York, have with the Twin Towers because of the incredible loss of life there. The first time we've ever been attacked in America on our mainland. And so Building 7 gives us a gateway to open our minds. And for most of you, you you have to answer a few more questions as a result. And I want to help you in that process by inviting you to sign up for our monthly email newsletter. So there are 5 clipboards in this room that I asked a fine group of people to help me with. Where are those clipboards? Raise your hands and make noise. Where are my 5 clipboards? You guys went all the way over there. I've been looking for you. Can you bring all 5 clipboards down for me now, right now? Come on down with the 5 clipboards with all those papers on them. Stand up, walk down the stairs. This is your opportunity to shine, and give them a big hand. And if you would kindly put one in the front of each section. Are you listening to me? Gentlemen, one in the front of each section. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections, plus you guys. But you don't count. Not one of you believe the official story. Okay. 5 clipboards, 5 sections, and guess what? There's actually 6 sections. Guess what? I have a 6th clipboard. Do you have all 5 clipboards with you? How many clipboards do you have in your hand? I can't hear you, sorry. Where are the 5 clipboards that I gave you guys? I can't even believe this. No wonder the Spanish were so tough on you guys. Well, I've got 2. Can you split those up for me and start on one on each of these sections? Sign the clipboards downstairs on your way out if you'd like to be on our email newsletter list. So, and you can go to our website too, by the way. If you want to stay in touch with us, we'll give you the latest evidence and so forth. You can be a member for €2 or €5 per month. You can be a member of AE 9/11 Truth. We are a non-profit organization, and we only are able to spread the information about the World Trade Center towers with your help. We've got a lot of work to do. Now, we have made a film which is extraordinary. We have 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, not just me, laying out all of this evidence in 90 minutes. So here's the film. You only have to see 4 minutes of it.
I don't want to be involved in conspiracy theories. There are lots of them. They could go on. We can speculate on that forever. What we really need to know is how those buildings came down.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
To undermine scientific integrity is to undermine our democracy.
This is what NIST has done, denied and ignored crucial evidence.
The American people absolutely need the truth of 9/11.
More than 1,500 architects and engineers and 12,000 others, including many scientists, have signed the petition calling for a scientific investigation of the destruction of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7. The report, issued by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, referred to as NIST, was not valid science.
They're talking about a single columnar collapse or failure that resulted in a total collapse of the building.
Building number 7 descended in free fall for the first 100 feet, which means that there was absolutely no resistance to the descent whatsoever.
So all of the columns really needed to be severed at the same time.
The symmetry is the smoking gun.
NIST has admitted it went into free fall for 8 stories.
You don't need to be an engineer or an architect to see what happened to those buildings.
Dit is controlled demolition.
Zeker weten.
Zeker weten.
What I saw, it was a classic implosion.
the center of the core, the penthouse area, starts to move first, and then the building follows along with it.
NIST excluded the document from FEMA in Appendix C that documented the evidence of melting steel.
In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel.
There were these iron microspheres present in all of the dust samples. They needed to have been formed in extremely high temperatures.
All the characteristics of the microspheres, along with what I see in the attack of the beams that were actually found, tell me that thermite was involved.
In the dust, what we have found is a modern version of thermite, which we call nanothermite.
NIST concedes that they found no evidence for explosives. So then we asked them, well, did you look? And they said, no, we did not look for explosives or residues of explosives.
And in fact, the evidence is overwhelming that these red-gray crystals are very high-temperature incendiaries.
And we have watched as scientific integrity has been undermined and scientific research politicized in an effort to advance predetermined ideological agendas.
If this is a crime, I think everybody agrees it's a crime. Evidence was removed from the scene of the crime. You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. When the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned. This is not science.
You can have this video to take home tonight. And it's downstairs on your way out. 10 euros. Help us. So this is the reason we put a third beam of light in the sky, by the way. Representing Building 7, the key to justice for those who've lost lives, family members in the Twin Towers. Speaking of... Now you're coming alive. That's good. Wait till we get into this, because this is the most clear evidence, actually. When you look through the lens of the evidence that you've not seen in mainstream media, for instance, it's actually quite shocking. By the way, a lot of people just hated the tower's design. Robert Stern, famous architect, was one of them. Gigantic dumbness, he calls it. Right? You just extrude two squares until they become the tallest buildings in the world. I mean, compare that to the unfolding Art Deco of the beautiful Empire State Building, the tallest building in the world at the time. Others say, well, the sculptural purity of these forms. Okay, well, we're going to set aside the design of this building and look at the engineering, because until this time, you had a forest of columns in these high-rise buildings, for even up into the 60s. And so with Twin Towers, something else happened altogether. We put most of the structure around the outside and the rest of it inside in 47 massive core columns right around the elevator shafts inside. And we have welded and then bolted together exterior columns all around the outside. And here is the massive, almost solid steel, 1 meter by half a meter at the bottom of these 47 massive core columns. And then they would drop in these trusses with these lightweight concrete fillers on top of them. So this is the lightest part of the structure, vulnerable to fires, which is where NIST concentrated its theory of how the Twin Towers went down. So what you end up with 20 meters of open office planning. You're no longer bound by these columns in your placement of offices. But every meter you have marching all the way around the outside, this third of a meter square steel tube column on the perimeter structure. Inside, this is completely modern. You never had this. This was like awesome, except for the fact that some thought that this looked like a jail cell. You don't have these big picturesque windows like we do in today's skyscrapers, and a fairly low and oppressive ceiling for some. So they were only half occupied by most researchers who have looked at this. At the time of 9/11, they're kind of an albatross, a white elephant, not desirable. And any collapse has to come down through what? Those massive series of steel columns on the outside and the ones on the inside. So can that happen? Well, this is what we're going to take a look at. On the inside, the core columns, it's altogether 100,000 tons of structural steel, a heat sink, which would distribute by conduction of the heat, which NIST claims was about 900 degrees centigrade. It would have distributed it through the rest of the steel structure, which is the real reason that steel frame high-rises have never come down due to fire through that massive conduction. Well, let's take a look at what happened to these towers. It's 8:46 in the morning on 9/11. We have Flight 11 hitting the North Tower 15 stories down. And about 15 minutes later, the South Tower is hit about 30 stories down. And it collapses an hour later, and then 15 minutes after this one collapses. So it's not like the planes hit the towers and all this jet fuel, and it just was too much. No, NIST even says the jet fuel burned up mostly outside the building. After that, in 10 minutes, the jet fuel's burned up inside the building. And for an hour or so, we have normal office fires and some damaged columns. That's important to keep in mind, because NIST's theory is that those normal office fires, which in this case of the South Tower certainly were just about out, but they say this is causing this floor to sag. Well, if it were the case, this floor sagged. A sagging floor provides almost little to no side pressure on the perimeter columns. But since NIST saw those perimeter columns bowing in, what they did is impose an artificial 5,000-pound load in their computer model on every one of those 230 columns wrapping all the way around the building, forcing them to fail. It's like strangling the building, causing then this 15-story section above the point of jet plane impacts, which they say drove the rest of the building down by its massive weight. Well, we're going to look at this report that they came out with, 3 years, $20 million, and 10,000 pages. And guess what? They stop the entire analysis at the initiation of collapse. There's absolutely no analysis after the collapse begins. In other words, the ability of that cold, hard, intact structural steel below to resist this object. Well, we're going to be looking at the physics of this in a second. But they say, well, it doesn't actually include the structural behavior of the tower after conditions for collapse initiation were reached and collapse became inevitable. Interesting. Is this the use of the scientific method that we want to use? I don't think so. It's not rocket science to analyze the capability of the structure below to resist. So they say it offered minimal resistance and the large mass exceeded. It came down essentially in free fall, is what they say. So it did essentially come down in free fall, but that's a complete non sequitur. It makes no sense. Now, all of that aside, what we're doing tonight is looking at the evidence of explosive demolition. We're not going to argue with structural engineers or fire protection engineers about what fire or jet fuel can or can't do to the structural steel. For tonight's purposes, it's irrelevant. We have a lot of evidence here for controlled demolition, which is explosions, for which we would expect to have witnesses that hear sounds of explosions. They see flashes of light. Where? Not at the base of the structure, like World Trade Center 7 started, but at the point of jet plane impacts. Why? This is a deceptive controlled demolition. This is a magic show. We're being asked to focus on that large explosion of jet fuel that we keep seeing or kept seeing on the media. But something else is going on here in between the lines, which we're going to be looking at. The oral histories of the first responders, for instance, commissioned by City Fire Commissioner Thomas von Essen. He recorded 500 of his first responders to collect the memory before it became shaped by a collective story, which is great. Problem is, we didn't know about this until August of 2005, when the New York Court State of Appeals forced the city to release this information, this data, these interviews, to the New York Times. And then we learned that 118 of these firefighters were talking about all these explosions and flashes of light. Shook my bones, one of them says. Shortly before the first tower came down, I remember feeling the ground shaking. I heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. One floor under another. Figure it was a bomb because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. Well, let's see what they're talking about. Here's a known controlled demolition on the left, the North Tower on the right. Once again, is there any similarity as we slow it down to half speed? In the first 4 seconds, anyway, is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? Looks like one. No high-rises come down due to fires before. Should examine it. Seemed like on television when they blow up these buildings, seemed like it was going all the way around like a belt. All these explosions. Somewhere around the middle of the World Trade Center, there was this orange and red flash coming out. Initially just one flash. Then this flash just kept popping all the way around the building, and the building had started to explode. Well, here's the South Tower on the right, a known controlled demolition on the left. Is there any similarity in the first few seconds? Because something else happens that we'll look at right after this. I thought the terrorists planted explosives somewhere in the building. That's how loud it was, a crackling explosive.
As we were getting our gear on and making our way to the stairway, there was a heavy-duty explosion.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Is that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the...
Yeah, definitely secondary explosion.
I heard a second explosion and another rumble.
An hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much, much lower.
It just went boom, it was like a bomb went off. And another explosion came right from it, just everyone flying.
There were numerous secondary explosions taking place in that building. There were continuous explosions.
No, the first explosion, and there was a second explosion in the same building. There were 2 explosions.
Okay. Federal agencies that were down there do believe that there was some sort of explosive device somewhere else besides the planes hitting.
There was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. So obviously, according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
There was a secondary explosion, probably a device either planted before or on the aircraft that did not explode until an hour later.
Then there was those secondary explosions and then the subsequent collapses.
That the FBI most likely thinks that there was a car or truck packed with explosives underneath the buildings, which also exploded at the same time and brought both of them down.
Now, that's the first time we're hearing that. So 2 planes and explosives that were in the building. Is that correct?
That is the working theory at this point. That is...
A huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us. It sounded like gunfire. You know, bang, 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 bang. And then all of a sudden, 3 big explosions.
About 50 consecutive bangs, and it fell down like a waterfall.
And we heard the noise associated with an implosion.
We heard a very loud blast, an explosion. We looked up, and the building literally began to collapse before us.
We heard a loud explosion, and at that point, Building 2 was collapsing.
At that point, we heard a large boom. I looked up and just saw the building coming at us.
Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse? To me, it sounded like an explosion.
There was another major explosion. The building itself, literally the top of it, came down.
All of a sudden you hear explosion, and you could see the building starting to collapse.
Huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
We understand now there has been a secondary explosion on Tower 2.
According to the Associated Press, another building that has either been attacked or exploded.
The tower, rather, that has collapsed, though we are told, collapsed because of a third explosion.
And about an hour later after that, there was a huge explosion at the base of the South Tower. That's One World Trade Center, and part of the building collapsed.
We could hear a rumble, which was about 5 seconds long, preceding the actual collapse, and then a boom when each of those towers collapsed.
Just seconds ago, there was a huge explosion, and it appears right now the Second World Trade Tower has just collapsed.
I was about 5 blocks away when I heard explosions.
And then you heard from far away, boom, boom. And you heard the boom, 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 boom.
Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was like, if they had detonated.
Detonated.
Planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
From the corner, boom, 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 boom. Just like 20 straight hits. And as the bombs were going, people just started running. And I sat there and watched a few of them explode. And it just started going pop. It just started going boom, 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 boom. And he goes, how fast? I go, like firecrackers.
Well, how many of these explosions do you imagine witnesses of explosions, documentation of explosions ended up in the final report of NIST? Why? What's going on here? NIST says couldn't have been a controlled demolition because they start from the bottom. Well, what do we have here? Whoops.
Top floor.
Top floor.
Well, top-down controlled demolitions happen also.
In the right circumstances, you can release all of that stored energy, converting it into what is called kinetic energy. That's energy in motion, and that's what brings the building down.
So, there's a top-down controlled demolition as an example. Speaking of which, this is NIST theory, that the top part of this building drove the rest of the building down. Well, what we're going to do is look at the law of physics, Newton's third law. We're going to run a Mack truck into a Volkswagen. Who's going to win? You guys, you got this one, right? Equal and opposite destructive force. The bumper might be taken out by the Volkswagen, but the whole Volkswagen is going to be totaled by about that time, right? Does it matter if we drop the Volkswagen onto the Mack truck? No. The lighter part of a structure, which is composed of about a centimeter thick structural steel members versus very, very increasingly thick to solid steel at the bottom, this lighter part of the structure cannot possibly destroy the heavier, intact, cold, hard steel. Certainly not at free fall acceleration as if it weren't even there. And we'll see how fast this building actually came down in a minute. But I'm going to show you how it's coming down now. If we can turn these lights down. We don't have any movement here from here until about now. Another way to look at this, this tells us this upper part drove the rest of the building down, but it's destroying itself in the first 4 seconds, as you can see here. It's telescoping in on itself. Take a look. Just like Building 7 in the first 4 seconds. What's happening then? We'll start and stop. Just like the fireman said, belt of explosions wrapping all the way around the building. Start, stop. Fascinating. Does anybody see in any of the photos or videos a pile driver pushing the rest of the building down? It's not there. What do we see instead? More like a volcanic eruption like in the Tongan Sea in 2009, with upward, outward, arching streamers, laterally, freely flying objects with clouds trailing them, a geometry of fireworks, a symmetry evocative of explosions. What does it look like to you? Is that a collapse? Is this a collapse? Lights off. Underneath here, a violent series of, let's have all the lights off so you can really zoom in here with your, watch in the lower right corner. racing down the corner, almost as fast as the freely falling objects. Is that a collapse? The collapse is supposed to be up here somewhere. Something else is happening racing down this corner. What does it look like to you now? How about the South Tower? The South Tower begins to fall, and it's falling over. Well, it has at 22 degrees and falling off the building, so we have asymmetrical loading from that mass. We have asymmetrical damage from the fires up above, asymmetrical damage from the airplanes, and yet from below, what are we looking at here? Complete symmetry all the way down the building, just like the fireman described, like a belt all the way around the building equally. Can fire do that? Let's look underneath. 20 stories down below. What are we looking at here? Are you looking at a collapse or a series of hundreds of explosions just in this small quadrant? Must be thousands altogether, completely shattering the structure, one element from another, all the way down to the ground. Does it even look like a building that has collapsed? We have a series of columns that are obviously highly oxidized, reddened, and concave on one side, convex on the other, indicating perhaps some side concussive blast in this case. Extreme heat producing what has been described as noodles out of these solid steel or steel beams. Do we have a straight down symmetrical progression? Well, here's 400 meters, 300 meters, all the way around each building. And that complete symmetrical distribution of those structural steel systems landing well outside the boundary of ground zero even, landing on the winter gardens across the street, in fact. So in the Twin Towers, a very explosive event. Compare that to the nice, neat pile of the implosion that World Trade Center 7 was. Very different types of events, producing isolated explosive jets, which you can see in these videos quite clearly, actually. 20, 40, even 60 stories down below the so-called zone of destruction or the collapse. What are these doing way down here? Well, we're told these are puffs of air produced by that giant piston, that pile driver, which we saw was destroyed itself, so it couldn't be that. But if it were that, and say behind me is the core of the building, and this is the open office planning, if you will, and then the perimeter windows all around. And that air is going to come whooshing in here, and it's going to fill the room full of pressure. And if it blows out any of these windows, it's going to blow out all of them. Not these highly focalized, pinpoint accurate, violent ejections in this obviously engineered pattern that you can actually see as we play this over and over again right here, coming out way up here, even though there's something else going on way down here. Every one of these floors almost are ejecting these plumes at once. And you can even see how fast they're coming out. They are calculated by physicist David Chandler at 100 to...
We track two squibs near the bottom of the frame. They shoot out quickly at first, then slow and merge in with the rest of the dust cloud. Using the first few data points, we see the first squib shoots out at 44.98 meters per second, or about 100 miles per hour. Doing the same for the second squib, we get a speed of 56.3 meters per second, which works out closer to 126 miles per hour.
These are explosive speeds, not air pressure produced by some piston. Paul, let's leave the volume of the videos up because they come so fast. So these are also pulverized building materials. They're not puffs of air. You can see the solids in them as well. How fast is the building coming down? Well, we can time it. Here's 3 seconds. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Now, both buildings are coming down within about a dozen seconds. That is near free fall acceleration. It's accelerating straight down through what? Through that. As if it weren't even there. It's accelerating. It's not decelerating. It's not hesitating. It's not stopping when it hits resistance, because there is virtually no resistance, resulting in the total dismemberment of the steel structure. Ready, broken up, ready for loading and shipment. What about the lateral ejection of these structural steel sections? Freely flying structural steel sections, landing anywhere from 100 to 200 meters in every direction. My favorite being this one right here. What are we looking at? Back 2, 3, forward 2, 3, back 2, 3, forward 2, 3. We're looking at a 45-degree trajectory. Wait, how does gravity work? Let's see. Oh, down. What's going on here? There's an outward force that then ends up at 45 degrees and then down. Something else is going on here, resulting in the complete destruction of the winter gardens 200 meters away. It's enough force to eject these, to eject a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles, and there's hundreds of these sections distributed suchly. Where are the floors? Each of these towers had 110 of them. That's 220 acres, because each floor is an acre in size. Massive buildings. 220 acres of 4-inch thick and 8-inch heavyweight concrete at the mechanical floors, and fluted metal decking that they poured the concrete into originally. Where is it? Well, let's look. Well, this contractor came back to help clean up. He says, I didn't even see one floor deck come here. Or the joists. They must have disintegrated. There were 6,000 of them. There's stuff crumpled up, but go identify it as a floor deck. I couldn't believe it. Not one floor panel. This is the 2-story pile of core columns, perimeter columns, that's left over in the aftermath. In a pancaking or gravitational collapse, we'd expect a stack of floors. Maybe not all 110 of them, but God, wouldn't we at least expect 3/4 or half of them? 10 of them? We don't have one. What happened to them? And what happened to the 90,000 tons of concrete? It seems to be missing at the base of the structure. Here it is, pulverizing in midair, 90,000 tons of concrete, before it ever develops its kinetic energy, striking the ground below. In midair, 100-micron particles it's pulverized into. That takes an incredible force all by itself. From across lower Manhattan, 12 or 18 centimeters thick, this blanket of dust composed, in some samples, 30% concrete. That's where it ended up.
And you see, and there's no concrete. There's very little concrete. All you see is aluminum and steel.
What happened to the concrete?
The concrete was pulverized. And I was down here Tuesday, and it was like you were on a foreign planet. All of lower Manhattan, not just this site, from river to river, there was dust powder 2-3 inches thick. The concrete was just pulverized.
You have 2 110-story office buildings. You don't find a desk. You don't find a chair. You don't find a telephone, a computer. The biggest piece of a telephone I found was half of the keypad, and it was about this big. The building collapsed to dust.
What I expected to see was nothing like what I actually did see at the time of my arrival at the site. There wasn't much that you could say, you could describe. Everything was dust and metal. There was no typewriters, there was no chairs, there was no nothing.
there were 10,000 file cabinets or so in these buildings, steel file cabinets, but this is the only one that they could find. It was in the basement. Maybe that's why it survived. How did 10,000 file cabinets disappear? They made a big deal out of the one that they could find. What about the people?
In April 2006, New Yorkers were distressed to learn that bone fragments, human remains from 9/11, had been found on the roof of the nearby Deutsche Bank building.
And how, in God's name, did those fragments get there?
And bone fragments less than a centimeter long. How could they be so small?
Wait a minute. We're talking about 700 bone fragments, a centimeter long, on top of this building found? Well, they're not from the airplane that hit the South Tower because it sent its ejections out this way. They're not from the people in the airplane that hit the North Tower because the South Tower shadows or interferes with the flow and onto this building. How did they get there? There were 2,749 victims, but only 300 whole bodies were found. 20,000 pieces of bodies were found. 6,000 of them small enough to fit into a test tube. 200 pieces matched to one single person. And yet, 1,151 victims remain completely unaccounted for, vaporized, nowhere to be found. The distribution of these body parts is well beyond ground zero. How did they get there? Wouldn't we expect those bodies to be trapped between layers of floors found at the bottom in a gravitational collapse? What about this incredible heat that was being reported? Well, NFPA 921, the National Fire Protection Association in the U.S., the Guide for Investigation of Fire and Explosions, which was actually created in part by NIST themselves, so they should have followed it. It says, look for thermal effects, high heat, large volumes of gas, large amount of heat released from rapidly expanding plumes of gas. They describe what you're looking for in explosions. And before, during, and directly after the final destruction are these incredibly hot, expanding, cauliflower-shaped clouds, like in a volcano, that they just keep expanding several times the volume of the building in just seconds, as you can see here. This is not normal smoke from a collapse, although it is full of concrete as well. Caused from intense heat from rapidly expanding chemical reactions. How about extreme temperature in the pile themselves? Well, this is evident before, during, and after the final destruction. Bechtel documents about 1,200 Celsius temperatures. Where does that come from? Jet fuel only burns about 300-400 Celsius according to its manufacturer in open air. It's basically kerosene. Where do these fires, the office fires, NIST doesn't have evidence that they burned hotter than 300 or 400 Celsius, but they say that it burned up to 900, but without any evidence. Well, the truth is that people are seeing much, much hotter temperatures. Peter Tully, the construction cleanup director, says he saw pools of literally molten steel. In fact, here it is pouring out of the South Tower just 10 minutes prior to its collapse. This turns out to be molten iron, as we'll see. And NIST says, well, no, this must be melted airplane, because that's about where the airplane went in. But melted aluminum looks silvery. It doesn't glow bright orange in daylight conditions, as you can see here. The bend of the beam would be dripping with molten steel, like you see in this photograph of material being picked up at the World Trade Center. Steel members in the debris pile that appeared to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. Says Jonathan Barnett, the author of the FEMA report, fire protection engineer. We're talking 2,000 degrees Celsius temperatures. Nowhere near what was created, according to the official story, or that could be created by jet fuel and office fires. Melted girders, says Abul Hasan Astani, one of the structural engineers that had unlimited access. As you see here in this piece of World Trade Center 7, steel, melted. They document it in Appendix C, a scientific forensic examination by FEMA themselves, including Jonathan Barnett, in which they say melting capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like this piece from World Trade Center 7. Rapid oxidation, sulfidation, intergranular melting of steel. Fires don't do this. Liquid iron, this is molten iron attacking the steel. Sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel. Where does the sulfur come from? Where does liquid molten iron, documented by officials? Molten concrete flowing in World Trade Center Building 6. Around this gun, which is where the police were, and this piece is now in the police museum in New York. It takes 1,500 degrees Celsius to melt concrete. I didn't even know concrete could melt. And yet this gentleman, the co-project leader of the NIST report, has this to say.
First of all, let's go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, and there's no eyewitness who says so, nobody who's produced it.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry. Like lava.
Actually melted beams where it was molten steel that was being dug out.
Underground, it was still so hot that molten metal dripped down the sides of a wall.
And the cleanup was very difficult in the beginning. Steel was coming out red in certain areas from the first couple of weeks.
This fused element of steel, molten steel.
And they pulled off a big block of concrete, and there was like a little river of steel flowing.
Leslie Robertson, the World Trade Center structural engineer himself, documenting a river of molten steel. So here's John Gross with his trophy piece that ended up being the examination sample that was sent to FEMA and documented in World Trade in Appendix C. But it didn't end up in the NIST report because he eliminated that entire forensic examination from the final report when he took it over in 2003. But his shadow is all over the evidence. Well, the official supporters of the official story say 650 on the fire. There's a few variations of them, but none of them get up to 1,500 Celsius, where steel begins to melt. And what can create that? Well, thermite is one option we're going to be looking at. It can create temperatures exceeding 2,500 degrees. And we'll just see, do we have chemical evidence of cutter charges or explosives or incendiaries? What is thermite anyway?
An incendiary used by the military, thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel. We know that open-air fires cannot burn hot enough to melt steel, but metal had melted at the base of the towers. Appendix C of the FEMA report describes sulfur residues on the World Trade Center steel. The New York Times called this the deepest mystery of all. Sulfur slightly lowers the melting point of iron, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the structural steel. Sulfur used with thermite is called thermate, producing even faster results.
Interesting. So our background research supports that there is material, incendiaries, that can produce those extremely hot temperatures, which were found by officials in the World Trade Center, and the source of the sulfur, which is used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter when it's added to thermite. Well, NFPA 921, once again, which NIST had a hand in creating, says that you need to look for unusual residues that could arise from thermite. NIST acknowledged they never looked for such evidence. They refused to, but others did, like Stephen Jones, for instance, who finds very interesting chemical evidence that would be found if you had thermite, common elements such as iron, aluminum, copper, calcium, silicon, and unusual elements such as fluorine and manganese. These elements on the periodic table. And in fact, somebody gave him a chunk of steel to look at. Turns out it's not steel at all. It's pure elemental previously molten iron. Wow. Where does iron come from? Iron is one of the materials in the alloy we use as steel. But we stopped using elemental iron about 100 years ago. Well, fascinating. They call these chunks of molten material meteorites because they just didn't know what to call them. They'd never seen them before. So they take a small chip from it and they find it's predominantly iron. So he rules out molten aluminum from the airplanes. It has abundant manganese, so he rules out molten structural steel as a major component. It has aluminum, sulfur, potassium, interesting, and manganese and fluorine in abundance. So this manganese is commonly used from the potassium permanganate as an oxidizer in thermate. Fluorine used in sol gel type thermite charges, which are very, very high-tech forms of thermite. He does another sample on this piece of World Trade Center steel in this monument, and he finds X-ray fluorescence, once again, iron, sulfur, potassium, manganese. And then in this piece, too, is this a thermal lance that's taken this out, or is this something else in this piece of steel from World Trade Center 7? This is a oxyacetylene cut. You can see it's a very different edge that's created, left over. Compare that to this piece here, which looks more like it's been cut. So this piece from International Peace Park in Manitoba was also illustrative of some non-oxyacetylene cuts, and it indeed has what? Iron, silica, aluminum, manganese, the key ingredients of thermite. Well, thermite can be used to cut through steel. John Cole did it in his backyard. So he's done it very effectively. He just created his own cutter charge and put thermate in it. He actually made thermate. Now, there are more sophisticated devices than what he used for that experiment. They were developed before 9/11. They can issue in hundreds of milliseconds molten iron cutting through structural steel much more effectively than C4 and RDX, explosives that they would typically use in controlled demolition. Why wouldn't they use normal elements of controlled demolition, high-energy explosives? Well, they provide loud bangs, bright flashes. That would be a dead giveaway in a deceptive controlled demolition. Is that the reason they use thermite? There are thermite devices that have as their body consolidated thermite. In other words, it burns up itself after the cutter charge is released. Nothing left in the residue except in the piles except for molten iron, the byproduct of thermite. But sol gels would leave another binder, 1,3-diphenyl-propane. Whoa, what is this stuff? This is pretty interesting stuff. And EPA themselves finds one molecule present at levels that dwarfed all others, 1,3-diphenyl-propane. We've never observed it in any other sampling we've ever done. Well, interesting. What else was found in the World Trade Center dust by officials? Once again, iron microspheres. R.J. Lee, an environmental consultant, finds billions of them in their samples. The U.S. Geological Survey, in their toxicological studies, finds billions of iron microspheres the diameter of a human hair. Elemental iron, it's so many of them, it's a signature component. It's not even World Trade Center dust unless it has these iron microspheres. Previously molten iron microspheres. Stephen Jones also does research, an independent researcher. He finds them as well. All corroborating. Here's what happens when you light thermite. Slowing it down, you see thousands and thousands of molten iron microspheres that cool and fall. Well, fascinating. How does this happen? Well, if you had thousands of thermite cutter charges laced throughout the columns and beams in the building, and under pressure, explosive pressures, the liquid molten iron byproduct would be aerosolized. What happens when you aerosolize liquid? Let's see. Here's a spray bottle. Tens of thousands of what? Spheres from the liquid, which in the case of molten iron would cool and fall with all of the dust. This is the only rational explanation for where all of these elemental iron microspheres come from. Could it be the reason the tops of these cars are toasted? Is there any other reason that one can think of? What else was found in the World Trade Center dust? Do we have any unignited? If that was ignited thermite, maybe there would be unignited thermite. So Niels Harrit from Copenhagen and an international team of scientists that he led collected 4 independent samples given to them of this World Trade Center dust. Not only did they find the iron microspheres, but in all of these samples, like the one collected from Jeanette McKinley's apartment right across the street from the towers, they find the same curious red-gray chips, about 1.5 millimeters or so long, and they do some analysis on these curious chips, and they find it's not paint. When you look at the red side, you get carbon, oxygen, aluminum, silica, iron, the ingredients of thermite in the World Trade Center dust. What's this doing there? More interestingly, though, they zoom in 50,000 times with an electron microscope in this red layer, and what do they find? Rhomboidal-shaped nanoparticles of iron oxide, 40 nanometers across, with 100 nanometers across, and aluminum platelets, the ingredients of thermite, and evenly mixed, set in an organic bed of oxygen, silica, carbon. This is fascinating stuff. When you get particles at the nanoscale and you create an energetic thermitic reaction, because of the small size creates a massive surface volume, so the chemical reaction is virtually instantaneous, making it more explosive, but especially set in this organic bed, because organic material expands when it's heated like this. It's the reason you have TNT or explosives doing explosive force. More interestingly, when they heat these chips up in a heater, a differential scanning calorimeter, at 420 Celsius, they ignite, and which paint doesn't do. And so when it ignites, just like the tests done by Lawrence Livermore Lab, Los Alamos Laboratory, with this material which was developed prior to 9/11, they produce the same spheres with the same chemical signature as the spheres found in the World Trade Center dust. So we know where those spheres came from. It's a self-corroborating set of evidence that's internally consistent, and it could put a lot of people away for treason and mass murder if we can find them, because this appears to be the cause of the destruction of the World Trade Center. As if we didn't know where those spheres came from, because they're found attached to partially ignited red-gray chips. It's called superthermite, explosive composites, developed well before 9/11 by Los Alamos. Very sophisticated process, not made in a cave in Afghanistan. made only by the most advanced defense contracting laboratories. So we certainly want an investigation of the people who make this, right? It's all documented in a 25-page peer-reviewed paper in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal, which stands uncontested by any other peer-reviewed paper. And this has been up for 6 years now without being challenged. This is what you do in science. You put your own peer-reviewed paper to challenge somebody else's if you think it's not true. Well, so the question I have for you is the hypothesis corroborated for controlled demolition? Do we have 10 key conventional and unconventional characteristics of controlled demolition? Is that direct evidence of explosive destruction to you? Can fire create any one of those? Is there corroborative evidence also? Is that proof of controlled demolition to you? I'd love to ask you those same 3 questions. If we can turn up the lights, how many of us agree with the official story? How many of us are unsure? How many of us are convinced by this evidence? First, the official story. How many of us agree with it? Wait, raise your hand real high for those of you. I need to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you move it, I'll see it. If you move it, I will see it. 1, 2, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Over here. 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Over here. 22, 23, 24, 25. Anybody on the floor? What's the matter with you guys on the floor? Whatever that number was, Helia. Did you get these numbers? You writing them down? Yeah? Yes? Sort of? Yes. Thanks, Alexandra. How many of you are unsure? You might still be unsure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 29, 30, 31, 32, 34, 35, 36, 37, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 52, 53, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 67, 70, 72. How many of you think the towers came down by controlled demolition? Okay, a greater majority. I'm going to say 2/3. So, can we have a discussion? Is there a problem here for those of you who agree with the evidence for controlled demolition? We've seen that explosives and incendiaries were used to destroy these skyscrapers. Of course, it takes months of advanced planning and engineering to place these explosives. Who had the means, the motive, the opportunity to engage in this crime? Who benefited? These are the classic questions that criminal investigators and journalists should be asking, but are not. Who had access to these highly secure buildings? Who had access to this extremely sophisticated material? The architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth don't speculate about these issues. We don't have conspiracy theories for you. The evidence you've seen is just a small body of that which the 9/11 Truth movement has assembled over the last 13 years for you. It is available. The questions raised are numerous and ominous that must be answered in a real investigation. So this is just the beginning of admittedly a disturbing but essential opportunity for you to uncover the rest of the mystery. We have to follow up here. If our curiosity is piqued, if we're bothered by the information, there is indeed a way that you can follow up. Grab a DVD on the way out. You can get books from our website. You can get T-shirts that'll prompt you. The people will come and ask you what's going on? Why rethink 9/11? Call or write your elected representatives, even here in Amsterdam, Delft, everywhere in the Netherlands. Send the AE 9/11 Truth link to every architect, engineer you can find, everybody else that you know. Sign the petition.
Are we ready for questions?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Just about. Five more seconds.
Yeah.
Become an AE 9/11 Truth contact. Start a group. And whatever you do, follow your conscience and act. Because if we if we allow the truth about 9/11 to be swept under the rug of history, we'll have more false flag attacks on Americans, more wars around the world, millions more killed, more economic manipulation, worsening financial crisis, more loss of civil liberties, and of course we become a whole lot less safe. Whereas the truth about 9/11 illuminates these lies and results in the rectification of each of these disasters. So we see 9/11 in a whole new light, as a means of exposing massive corruption to its heights, more importantly as a way of recovering from its ills. So it's not too late to discover for yourself, where do you draw your line in the sand? Do you wait for the next 9/11, predicted by members of Congress and the media to be far worse than the last? No, speak the truth. The time comes when our silence is betrayal. Thank you. Thank you. Do we have a microphone out on the floor?
Yeah.
Where?
3.
Where? Who's got them?
1.
Okay, great. Here's our first question. Would you stand up? Stand up, please. And belt it out. Put it real close.
Hi. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
I have 2 main questions, if I may. Yeah. My first question is, you would like to have justice. I want to know what kind of justice you want to have, for whom, and to what extent.
Well, we're architects and engineers.
Yes, well, wait for my second question so you can answer.
Let me just answer the first one first, because I hear it. We do want justice. We've got to find out who did this, how they got away with it, how it was set up, right? We're not going to just sit back and present evidence to everybody without some sort of vision, some sort of desire for justice, for the truth. But we are not criminal prosecutors, so we don't know how to go about that.
But you want to see prosecutions of people involved and officials involved at the time.
Guilty parties should be brought to accountability.
Only for Americans, or also for Iraqis and Afghan families who were damaged by the consequences of these
I didn't hear.
things?
Only for what?
Only for Americans, or also for the others?
Who's ever guilty needs to be brought to justice. We don't have preconceptions about who's responsible for this.
Okay. My second question is, if an independent investigation is done and the conclusion is that you were correct, then consequently some could use this as an example to point out fundamental flaw within the United States politics. So what do you think it would mean for the Americans and the government to confirm this theory?
I think there would be a lot of anger on the part of American people and people around the world once they realize that they've been deceived. And I don't know how that develops. I don't know what the process is to manage the upheaval that would be caused, I imagine, by awareness of the truth on a mass scale, that we were massively deceived. I don't have the answer to those questions. I don't feel responsible for having to have those answers. Next question. Go ahead.
You showed the parts about people hearing babooms, but you also told us that termite doesn't make a sound, or am I right?
Yeah, isn't that an interesting set of circumstances? We have evidence, a testimony of explosions, and then we have thermite, which is less noisy than high-energy explosives. We have both. So I don't find that as much of a contradiction as the official story. Next question? Right here.
Well, you have collected a lot of evidence, but what are the legal means actually to be able to use this evidence to convince the legal system to go for a renewed investigation? You must have studied that.
There are people who are experts in the legal system who I hope will find some way to have an impartial, objective investigation, which immunity is offered to bring forth witnesses, and that testimony is taken under oath.
But the testimonies
I don't know how to ensure that process.
Yeah, but the testimonies are there already. You show them.
What?
The testimonies are there already. You show them.
The testimonies are what?
The testimonies are there already. You show them.
They're already. Yeah, we've got a lot of evidence and testimony. I completely agree. Do we know what to do with that? We're not criminal prosecutors. The question is it valid? Does it make sense? And there's got to come forth a body of people whom we can trust to investigate this and bring forth the right people and get some real justice here. We're architects and engineers.
That's the key question on this moment. How to transfer this into a legal system, as a consequence of which you have the real proof that the evidence leads to the conclusion.
I don't know how to secure justice. I really don't. We're technical and building professionals. We've convinced most of you that there's a real problem here. Maybe the next step is yours. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you for coming and your passion. How have you been treated in the States? When you are opposing the government this strictly, you normally don't get appreciated so much. So when you go around and you basically do these presentations, how are you being treated by the authorities, by the press, and by, in general, the American society with this story?
It's not too different than here in the Netherlands, as some of you have become aware. It's a tough uphill battle. We're pushing a very heavy rock uphill. This story does not want to be heard. This information does not want to be digested. And the media is foremost among those who are not supporting its release. We'll call that censorship. It turns out that 90% of the mainstream media in America is owned by just 6 corporations. Those who have looked at those corporations find that they're the same people that run them, that run the corporations in the arms industry, the oil industry, the banking industry, the insurance industry, all of whom profited enormously from 9/11. So if we want to start somewhere looking for answers, there's another good start. Louder?
Are you familiar with the work of Dr. Judy Wood?
Yes.
And if so, what do you think of her conclusions?
Well, Dr. Judy Wood has put together some phenomena, and one of the things that she's put together is excuse me. My problem with Judy Wood is that she denies the evidence for explosions, which you've seen overwhelming, irrefutable evidence for. She denies the evidence for molten iron, hot molten iron, which you've seen plenty of evidence for, and the evidence of nanothermite, which is plenty evident as well. And so somebody who denies the basic scientific forensic evidence that we do have, and then provides no evidence for a theory which she can't even highlight, I just have a lot of reason to be doubtful. Let's put it that way.
You read her book?
Yeah, I have the book.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Did you read it?
Yeah. Yeah, look at page 124 through 126. You'll be convinced yourself.
You don't think she's putting the evidence there?
Read page 124 through 126. Wow. Denies thermite, denies explosions, denies molten iron.
She denies, but she brings up a whole lot of other things. And you're denying that.
Right. She says that the steel was dustified, for instance. Let's look at this. This is what she uses as her reasoning for the steel being dustified. This is the remaining spire after the tower comes down. She says this thing is turning to dust. But what it's really doing, you can see it falling. There's an explosion on it. It shakes some of the dust off, but it's clearly falling. It's not turning to dust. It's shaking dust off of it. So that's one example of why I have serious doubts. Next question. We're trying to get through a lot of questions in the time we have left. Who's got the microphone?
Yeah.
Up
First
here?
of all, I would like to say I really admire your work and effort you put into all this, especially with all the ridicule and character assassination from mainstream media. For me, looking at the evidence, it's so clear, especially when looking at the free fall speed, now no thermite. You can't deny it. I think it's a matter of cognitive dissonance. People are afraid of the truth because then...
What is your actual question?
I'm getting to my question. Yeah, boo. No, my question is like a personal question. Aren't you afraid of the outcome of this? Because you do know you're opening a can of worms.
Yeah, I should have never done that. Open this can of worms. That's what I'm told. But you know what? That's what I do. I guess I've been doing that all my life, opening cans of worms. I'm not afraid of the worms or the people who are controlling the worms or the whatever the worms might do to me. I have no fear about this. We have to make a decision here. Are we going to have a society based on truth and freedom or fear and lies? Which do you want?
Well, I think it takes a lot of courage for you to stand there. I would not. I think I wouldn't.
That's why.
In Dutch they say ik zou het niet durven. Dus.
That's why we have 2,300 architects and engineers who will back you up when you decide to open your mouth about this evidence and wake other people up who are unwilling to even look at it. We can help you. Next question, right here. Stand up, please.
My question.
Stand up, please. Stand up.
My question is more about the seismographic.
I can't hear you.
Is there any seismographic evidence about not only the planes which struck into the buildings, but also about these bombs?
Yes. There's a lot of seismographic evidence, and the 9/11 truth community is not in agreement over how to interpret it or what it means. Everybody seems to have a different opinion about it, and it's rather mystical, if you will, for a lot of people, so I don't have it in this body, but I do believe there's plenty of evidence to actually suggest, for those who look at it, that I trust that there's evidence of explosions going off, particularly down low in the basement, even before the plane hits the tower, as documented by janitor William Rodriguez and others. Yes, well, who's got the microphone? I need to hear from you where you are. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. Your entire hypothesis is based on the statement that thousands of thermite charges were placed at the girders, near the columns, and the intersection with the girders. So do you have a corroborated hypothesis that backs how this could have been done, to place thousands of charges, including the cabling, because these sort of demolitions require kilometers or miles, if you would say, of cabling to time the charges?
Well, first of all, I disagree with your assumption that our entire hypothesis is based on thousands of thermite cutter charges. We can take that entire element out and throw it away, which I am considering. And we have video evidence and eyewitness testimony. That's plenty of evidence to put a lot of people away for treason and mass murder. Second, that second part of yours, say it again.
Well,
cabling.
But
we're talking about an unlimited budget here. People who could perpetrate this and profit so enormously from it, whoever they are, would probably have wireless systems which are in place. We're not talking about miles of cabling. Also, you're asking a really important question here about how access might have been made to the towers. Well, we had the 9 months prior to 9/11, we had an elevator modernization, the largest one in the world, going on in these towers, both of them. Ace Elevator had this contract. It's documented in Elevator World in March of 2001. They came out of nowhere to get this bid, so we certainly want an investigation of them, whose employees fled when the plane hit the first tower. These are the guys that are experts in the delivery systems, the elevator cabs, to help the firefighters rescue the victims. So it was quite a scandal documented in USA Today. We certainly want an investigation not only of Ace Elevator, but the security company under whose noses would have to have had, we're talking maybe 10 tons of thermite, nanothermite, probably high energy explosives as well, which would probably account for the loud bangs that were heard.
Yes, but as you stated, a lot of the structural elements were also placed at the perimeter of the building. And in the video, you pointed out the cascades of what appeared to be charges as the building collapsed. And if I follow your hypothesis, that would require charges also placed at the perimeter of the building.
It sure
not
looks
only
like
in the core.
Yeah, it sure looks like it to me. And in fact, these buildings were largely empty by many researchers. We're talking half full, maybe. Others were moved around, so it very well could be that the charges, they had access to the exterior as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Tell me where you are. Thank you.
Yeah. Back left.
I need a microphone. You need a microphone. Go ahead.
Good evening.
Can you come back? Sorry. Let's get some of these questions in the front row. These guys haven't had a chance at all, too. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I had a question over a Russian engineer, Dmitry Galezov. He had he made some line of reasoning, and he said, okay, all these explosives, they might help weakening the towers, but the real blow was from three nuclear devices buried at 70 meters under the towers. Did you ever hear this story?
Yeah. My problem with the people who believe there were nuclear weapons that destroyed the Twin Towers is that nuclear weapons produce massive amounts of radiation, not slightly above background.
Yeah,
let me just finish. Okay. They produce very, very, very loud bangs, and they produce flashes as bright as the sunshine.
But
so we don't believe that there were nuclear weapons involved.
But not when they are 70 meters under granite.
Well, if there's a nuclear explosion 70 meters down, and it's going to come up and destroy the towers, then it's going to release that blast and that light
and pulverize
that radiation.
Yeah.
Is there another question? Right here.
Yes. First of all, thank you for your presentation. Last 2 hours you have been mostly backing up your own theory.
Wait, I can't hear you.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, thank you for your presentation. Last 2 hours we have been listening mostly to you backing up your own theory, and you also named something about, said something about objectiveness. I'm just curious about the whole theory you just presented. Are there any strong counter arguments to it? Do you know any of them?
I haven't seen any strong counter arguments to this stuff. I've debated people like 3 or 4 or 5 times very publicly. These debates are on our website. You can decide if you think they're strong or not. Most of them are straw man arguments that don't address the free fall of Building 7, the evidence of molten iron under all 3 towers, the iron microspheres found in the dust that are not even explained by officials, the nanothermite unignited particles. These things are not addressed, so they are not strong arguments. The laterally freely flying structural steel objects landing 200 meters in every direction. Thank you. How about a microphone down here in this area? Go ahead.
Hi. I would like to come back at the point someone over there made. You said the building was half empty, but you showed us level by level was coming down, so there should have been explosives, whatever. I can't deny what I've been seeing, but Are there any witnesses who've seen people installing anything? Because you've ignored that point.
There are some witnesses that see things that are not corroborated, so it's not strong enough for me to put it in the presentation or to bring it to you. I haven't seen anything strong enough or heard anything.
In this theory, there must have been a shitload of explosives.
Is that a technical term?
Are there no witnesses of it? Any? It can't be.
The question is, if they came forward, would we know about it?
If experts say it would take months, and you don't have any witnesses of that?
Do I need them in order to have this evidence be valid? The answer is no.
Can I ask a question?
I would love to have some witnesses come forward and say, hey, I'm responsible for mass murder. I planted those charges. I don't think they're going to do that. We don't know if they're alive.
I'm not asking for people who did it. I'm asking for people who've seen anything.
Yes, and there are people, Scott Forbes, for instance, who said he saw actually lots of engineers doing cabling the weekend before 9/11 when there was a power down in half of one building. That's not enough evidence for me yet, but it is an answer to your question. I would love to have more witnesses come forth, you bet. Raise your hand if you have a question. The microphone will come to you. Yes?
Mr. Gage, as you probably know, controlled demolition requires very precise timing, otherwise it will fail. How do you explain the explosives charges and thermite not being set off early by the impacts of the planes?
Well, maybe they did. There was a huge explosion when the plane hit.
But wouldn't the building have collapsed early then? Because it took some time.
Well, you're assuming that if it set off some charges, which I'm not sure it could do, thermite behaves very differently, requires extremely hot temperatures to even set it off. But that wouldn't necessarily start a chain reaction setting off the whole building early. I don't buy that.
Do you actually know how much thermite you would need to cut through the columns?
Well, we know how much residue of thermite there was by extrapolating.
Do you know how much is needed? Because if it is 1,000 kilograms, it would be very difficult to place it on the columns without anybody noticing it.
We know there's 10 tons or so of residue of ignited thermite in the iron microspheres, and by extrapolation also there's about 10 tons of unignited nanothermite chips found. That's about 20 tons altogether. I don't know how much is required, no.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thanks.
I've been looking into the 9/11 myself, and there's
Move the
one
microphone
question,
closer to your mouth.
There's one question that is actually not investigated by nobody, and that is what happened to the 4 planes. The explosions of the 4 planes at the Pentagon, in Shanksville, and into the Twin Towers result in very small particles of these planes. The Twin Towers spit out the plane parts. You can see photographs of the plane parts around the Twin Towers before they collapsed. And the size of the particles of these planes indicates that there was a big force at play. And if you look at the initial impact of Flight 175 in the tower, you see a big boom. But nobody heard the boom here, because the videos of this plane hitting the towers, we only see it, but we don't hear it. And there are a few exceptions of these videos released by people a few years ago. But why is it not that we focus on the initial explosion of the 4 planes?
I don't know what microphones were available to record that. I do know that I've spoken in the 400 presentations I've done. I've had 8 people come up to me and tell me that they saw with their own eyes, live in New York, the plane. In fact, two of them, both planes.
I'm not saying there were no planes.
Both planes hit the buildings. I don't know about the audio, though.
The audio is missing from the NIST. The video that was given to the NIST does not have the audio of the initial explosions.
I haven't studied that.
I find that very curious that an MIT investigator also said the only thing we would not have investigated is the actual destruction of the plane itself. The force what was needed to explode the plane.
Okay. Let's go to the next question. I haven't studied that. Go ahead.
Over here. Yes. Stand up. Yes. All right. Thank you very much for your lecture, sir. I'm an investigative journalist, and I work for an international radio program. I'm based in the Netherlands, but for over 5 years I do in investigative journalism into many things, amongst other things 9/11, and your lecture is stunning. Thank you.
Thank you.
By the way, I want to tell you that the mainstream media in the Netherlands is very much controlled, and many people here must have difficulty before coming to the lecture to believe you. I'm coming to it. But I would like to ask you to contact me for an interview on my radio station.
I didn't hear. Contact for what? Yeah, we'll talk. Come have a beer with us. We're actually going to go out and have a beer tonight. You guys are all welcome to join us. Over here?
Perhaps pertinent questions.
We're going to figure out where we're going, too. Vico, find out where we're going so I can announce.
A pertinent question, since we're at a technical university. Since it's official dogma now that office fires can sink steel frame buildings, are there any...
Yeah, sorry, start over. There's too much noise. I can't hear you.
Since it's official dogma that office fires can now sink steel frame buildings, are there any changes in building regulations? Are they teaching the students here anything differently so that future buildings won't collapse due to fire?
There's been no structural changes in the International Building Code, which is our code that most countries use now. None. No structural changes. There's been a few fire code changes, coding changes, egress width changes, things like that. And that's a problem. I agree with you. You'd think if fire can bring down 3 high-rises like this, especially one not hit by an airplane, no jet fuel, at free fall acceleration, that the entire code would be turned upside down until they found the problem. But no. The international building officials believe that their codes remain safe. That's the conclusion.
Sharp left.
I can't
Sharp
see you.
left.
Here.
Hello.
Raise your hand.
Over here. To your left. To your left. Yes, me.
There we are.
In 2006, I spoke to Rick Siegel. Do you know him? He has.
I've heard of Rick Siegel.
He has footage of something that should be in your presentation. He was standing 3 kilometers away from the explosion, and
he was across the river.
And when he adjusted for the speed of sound, the explosion was actually before the towers came down. You should put it in there.
Yeah, it's very interesting. There's a problem with him, and I can talk to you about that later.
Okay.
Hello, here above.
Where are we, guys?
Hi. Here above. Hello.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, they said on the news that the
Can't hear you.
They said on the news that the airplane was hijacked by Al Qaeda. And what is your opinion about it? Do you think it's hijacked by American or just set up?
I haven't studied these things like others, like David Ray Griffin has, is one of the research pilots for 9/11 Truth has studied these things. What they find is that these planes exhibited very, very sophisticated mechanical maneuverings immediately before hitting their targets in the towers, suggesting that they were remotely controlled. After all, these pilots failed Cessna flying school, most of them, and were most likely, in fact, pilots themselves say, you can't hit a target 200 feet wide. How many meters is that? My architect. 200 feet wide. 70? 65 meters wide, going 500 miles per hour. How many kilometers? It's impossible. I don't know. I haven't studied that, but there's some serious problems with all of these pilots. So many people, and they're not on the flight manifests, so many people don't even believe that they were on the airplanes. Start talking. Hi.
Yeah, just a personal question.
Can't hear you.
A personal question.
Yeah.
Don't you get frustrated by the fact that everyone wants to challenge your alternative theory?
Do I look frustrated? I guess I do.
No,
I feel
don't.
frustrated.
I'm not finished yet. But at the same time, these kind of people are not that keen to challenge the governments that tell them the same story that they most of the time don't understand either. So that's my question. It's only the challenge for the alternative theories, thank you, but not for the main talk that the governments are giving to us.
Can you
What's your reaction on that? So don't you get frustrated about that you're challenged and we don't do that the same way to the main story that is provided by the governments?
I am very frustrated, yes.
It seems that it can be.
But we have more and more, millions more people becoming aware of this evidence. Thousands of people are speaking about it in the streets. Every metropolitan area has a 9/11 Truth movement with people out on the streets handing out on the 11th of every month, often, the information about the World Trade Center towers.
We have time for 2 more questions because some students are already leaving because there are exams tomorrow. So it was great that they were here, but it's about time to conclude. Maybe 2 more questions,
sure.
Richard?
Here's one.
Thank you very much. Are you aware of the nose-out theory? Are you aware of the nose-out theory, and what do you think about it?
Start over.
Are you aware of the nose-out theory?
The nose-out theory.
Nose out. You're talking about some videos that have been faked that show the nose of the airplane going through the building and coming out the other side. I'm sure that there's been some videos that have been faked. There's lots of information about that. What that doesn't prove is that the planes, it doesn't prove that the planes weren't real. We do have evidence the planes hit the towers. I personally, as I mentioned earlier, have talked to 8 people who have seen the planes hit the towers, and we're reliving that with dramatic, visceral experience, emotional experience, as they were telling me. So I think they had no agenda to pull over on me. I mean, these are people I just happened to have been talking to afterwards that told me their experience.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Over here.
If your story is true, a lot of people should be involved in it.
People should be what?
Involved in it to make this possible.
Revolting?
Involved.
Involved.
Yes.
Yes. Who here wants to be involved in doing something about this? Raise your hand.
So my question is...
Did I get the wrong question?
Why did it not leak out? No one.
Well, what do you mean no one's speaking out? The 9/11 Truth Movement has millions of speaking out.
Yeah, but no...
Leaking out.
No...
Sorry.
No one who was involved in doing this did leak out.
We're talking about a black operation, which they have ways of keeping these people silent. I mean, I don't know what they do. I don't know if these people are still alive. I can't be responsible for them not coming forward. You don't need them to come forward in order to validate this science. It stands on its own. I appreciate the question. I think it's a really important question. I don't have an answer. And thank you, everybody. Join us for a beer. Where are we going?
I don't know. In town.
Vico? What?
Café de V.
Café de V.
Yes.
Did I say it right?
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.